On today's episode, board games and war games, how to war game your finances. Welcome to the ultimate crowdsourced personal finance show. This is ChooseFI. All right, guys, really excited to dive into this week. Got a lot to cover. And I thought what we could do is it's good for all of us just to every once in a while take a step back and analyze and assess our risk tolerance. And I think it's very useful exercise to do that through the lens of what are the variables that are unique to your situation. So Brad and I kind of mapped out a few ideas, got an awesome conversation planned. And to help me with this, I have my co-host Brad here with me today. How you doing, buddy?
Hey, Jonathan, I am doing quite well. And yeah, that's quite a title, Board Games and War Games. I like it. But yeah, board games. So I think the audience probably knows by now that our family, both of our families, are huge board game nuts, right? I think that's something we probably talked about dozens of times over the years. And we actually got this cool email from Liz, and this is another one of probably our short list of life hacks. I think that you introduced me to originally, which is this website called Camel Camel Camel.
Mm.
So for anybody out there that has not heard us talk about this, if you go to this oddly named camelcamelcamel.com, you can essentially put in price watches on any product on Amazon.com, which is in effect any product that you can buy in the world for all intents and purposes, right? So the cool thing that I don't think most people intuitively realize is that prices on Amazon vary wildly. I mean, Jonathan, I've seen items that I put a price watch on at $70 spike down to $32 sometimes, right? And you never know until you see this graph of, oh, hey, this is the price of what I've seen on this particular product over the last year. And the proof is literally right in front of you with that price graph. So essentially what you do is you put this watch on and say, hey, Camel, 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 send me an email when the price reaches X number of dollars. You get that email and you just click and you mosey over and buy it. It's really incredibly cool. And I've used this to save on everything from like squat racks for my garage gym to, as we were talking about here, board games. And so
Wait,
Liz
can I?
sent this
I want to
email.
clarify
Yeah.
something. I've noticed there's massive variances in price on board games. I personally usually save anywhere from 25 to 60% on board games using the method you described. Gym equipment, typically there aren't as much variance. So you're saying you were actually able to use this on your squat rack?
Yes, I absolutely was. So, yeah, you're right. With most gym equipment, like let's say dumbbells or barbells or weight plates or something like that, I've seen in my experience, and this is anecdotal, I've seen very little variance to your point. But when it comes to something like a weight bench or a squat rack, I've seen them vary 30, 40, 50%. So I think I wound up getting the squat rack that I bought for, it was something crazy, like $197. And it was normally 315. I mean, this is, going back in the memory banks here, but it was something very,
Wow.
very close to that. And highly ranked squad rack. And it was just as simple as just saying, okay, look, I don't need to purchase this at the moment. And I think that's the crucial part, Jonathan, right? Is, for people who need to buy, I need that little hit, that little dopamine hit. I've got to buy it now. That's probably not going to work, right? I mean, that's not the FI mindset anyway. But if you say, okay, look, this is something that I don't need right at this moment, like your list of board games. I know you have dozens of board game price watches in Camel, 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 and you say, look, I've got 100 board games already. I don't really desperately need these next five, but I will buy them if they get down to this price. So it's a cool mindset.
Harder to find the time to play them than it is to buy them. Just little observation
Yeah,
there.
no, that's true. So, okay, since I've mentioned Liz's email here, let me read it. So she said, I heard about Camel, Camel, Camel on your podcast a while ago and set price alerts for Catan, Ticket to Ride Europe, and Exploding Kittens. Just this week, I received price alerts on all of them. Catan was $25, list price is $55. Ticket to Ride Europe was $25, list price $49, so half price. And Exploding Kittens was $10, list price $20. I've been wanting these games for over a year, and your recommendation of Camel, Camel, Camel allowed me to buy them at a price point at which I felt comfortable. Thanks for everything you do. The fire is spreading.
This is awesome. Those are some good games, by the way. Can I just comment that I have played Catan maybe around 5 to 10 times over the period of my life. And the one time that I was totally on tilt, more thrown off than I've ever been. I was actually playing with your family and specifically Laura. And I don't know why. I don't know if she was just having the game of her life, but I just kind of knew I was going to lose the entire time. and I just slowly watched like the lines get drawn around me, and I just knew I was toast. And she just came out of nowhere with this kind of wild card play, but I knew she somehow I just knew she was going to win even earlier in the match. She had me completely on tilt, and it was demoralizing. It was really Laura. Yes, I'm talking to you. It was totally demoralizing. Uh, I
That's
actually
awesome.
finished the
Yeah.
game totally afraid. Uh,
Oh man, it's like when we played Connect Four, right?
Oh my goodness, yes, Brad is dirty. All right, so let's to connect four. My goodness, man. You just yeah, people wondered who won, and some people gave me credit. It's like, no, he freaking had a smile on his face the entire time. Let's talk about this for a second because we're gonna pivot into board games versus war gaming your finances here. And I wanted to say people don't realize that life is a board game. Life may be the ultimate board game, and your finances are a piece of this game. When you know the rules, it makes it easy to win. Let me ruin one board game for you for life. It's been around forever. If you haven't seen The Sixth Sense yet, I could spoil that for you as well. I'm going to spoil this game for you right now. Monopoly. There is a guaranteed way to lose all your friends and win Monopoly every single time, and to win within a period of about an hour. This game should not be played by anybody. It's just you can break the game. It's called the Elfer technique. And basically, the strategy here is that in Monopoly, the set has 32 houses and 12 hotels. No more, no less. If all the houses are built, no one can build houses. You can't get a hotel without houses. So if your play right out the gate is just to keep other people from getting houses. You land on any property, you buy a house. They land on the property and they don't buy it, gives you the chance the auction, you buy the house. You soak up all the houses, no one else can get houses, no one else can get hotels. Game over. You win with it. You win within about 60 minutes and you lose all your friends. That game has been ruined now. This is called the Elfer technique. You can look it up by knowing the rules, and maybe the rules that not everybody knows, but the action, and not just the rules, but the implications of the rule. You will quickly break the game. This is kind of what we're talking about when we're talking about your finances. When you understand the rules of this game, and sometimes it seems like the rules are stacked against you because society says go take out student loan debt, go take out student loan debt, get the degree at any cost. Finance stuff up to your eyeballs. You can afford the payments. There are a million variations of this normal societal script that keep you trapped. But when you kind of understand the concepts that we're talking about here, you start to see this unwritten, unspoken framework for living a better life. And inevitably over time, you can break the rules and you can break the rules and win this game. You have an unfair advantage. You're getting access to information that other people just simply aren't aware of. And I think it's a little bit like that. And so, with that in mind, we've been working through kind of the building blocks of financial independence, kind of working our way through this. We kind of push back at all these different societal scripts, that manifests in a bunch of different ways. What does health look like? What does mindfulness and intention look like? How do you get your actions to line up with your intention? And then when we're actually looking at the lens of finance, what are good deals and bad deals? Not every financial move is a good move. What actually works? And we try to simplify that as much as possible so we all have a way to win. We've been building on this. If you look to our Back to the Basics episode and episodes we've done up till recently, we've covered everything from how to analyze your expenses, understanding the power of compound interest, how to analyze your income and your expenses. And I thought what we could do today, Brad, as labeled in the title, is kind of war gaming your finances and specifically your risk tolerance. This year's been a crazy year, and it feels like maybe we're getting to a little bit more of a steady state. And maybe, you've just felt like you've been on tilt, and maybe it's just time now to go ahead and take a look at all the different variables that make you and your situation uniquely you. We're not all in the same financial situation with the same obstacles and hurdles there, but the framework is very similar, and much like we were talking about end of the year tax planning, these are the variables. These are the considerations. Let's come out of that, and now let's take a look at your life as an individual. Brad, I think this is kind of mapping this out to the idea of board games and realizing it's really important to understand the framework that we're all operating under.
Yeah, I love that. And you're right. I mean, this year especially has caused a lot of us to really think about what do we hold true, right? We have these investor policy statements that we've talked about multiple times, originally with the white coat investor. And sure, we set those and we have a plan, right? We set those in good times so that we're not running wild with emotions. And then we stress test it. And I think that's what this wargaming, that's another really synonym for this, right? Is we're stress testing our own investor policy statements. We're stress testing our own mindset of hey, do I really have the risk tolerance that I thought I did? And sure, it's easy to say, okay, this is going swimmingly, times are great. But when times are unsettled, then you see, right? When the tide goes out, you see who's wearing that bathing suit, right? And what you really feel. And then again, in somewhat calm times, you can make adjustments. And I think that's perfectly rational. I think all of us should be doing that constantly as we go through these undulations. That really is life, right? Life is lumpy. That's what we say here. We say it in other contexts, but life is lumpy in that there are good times and there are bad. And you have to just hopefully not make rash decisions. And you need to think through things. And that's what this wargaming is going to do.
So with that in mind, we'll go ahead and hop into it. And I think there's going to be there's a lot of variables here. We'll hit on some that seem relevant for each of us, and then the audience will probably have their own. I think it's really important to point out that I'm not trying to give you specific financial or investing advice with this. What we're doing as individuals is we're just talking about the variables that we personally are considering. Some of those have been constant all through time. Some of those have changed as we've gotten new information or as maybe our life circumstances have changed slightly. And we'll just kind of talk through what those individual pivots are for us personally. What I want you to do to our audience that's listening to this is not necessarily do exactly what we're doing in terms of the actual choices that we made, but just think through the questions that we're asking to evaluate what it might look like for you. And so, Brad, I thought we could start with much the way that we do our expenses. What does your life actually cost? Variable one, I think is probably what does your life actually cost? And this is, one of the ways to assess debt is, or to assess your risk tolerance is, how much do I need to bring in each month to maintain the life that I have either financed or that I have kind of locked myself into for this period of time? And Brad, how has that changed for you over time? I mean, I guess let's just start there. How do you evaluate your expenses and how does that affect your risk tolerance?
Yeah, that's a good question. And change over time is something that is another interesting thing to look at, right? And that's kind of the cool aspect of life, of this podcast, of being completely open and transparent, right? Like we try to be, certainly here at Jonathan, that any astute listener of this podcast knows that I moved a couple of years ago to a more expensive home, right? And I was very transparent about the reasons behind that, that this was based on community. And it wasn't just the simple dollars and cents of how much does this cost? Oh, it's going up. I couldn't possibly do it, right? Like if it was as cut and dried as that, we would have never moved. But we very willingly took on a more expensive home because we thought that the life benefits would outweigh the additional costs. So, yeah, what's interesting is, yeah, my actual living expenses, which are really the most significant portion of my yearly expenses, they went up probably, if I had to guess, it's probably somewhere around 40 to 50%. So that's not insignificant. So again, you make decisions with eyes wide open, but yeah, my living costs are still very inexpensive for the 4 bedroom beautiful house that we have, but it's somewhere in the vicinity of maybe 17 or $1,800 a month.
And when you look at that, so you look at what your life actually costs, then for me, the next line of delineation is how much of that is structural, rigid. I have committed this. There's no walking away from it short of like bankruptcy effectively. And how much of this is like optional, that's cushion, it's slush, it's the extra stuff on top that if I needed to, I could reel it back in. So you and I think at this point, all my student loans are paid off. We don't have any car debt. The only debt that we have is our mortgage. No couch payments, no boat payment, no whatever. You can think of a million things that, but I mean, you laugh, but not laugh. People have payments on crazy stuff
Yeah.
because society says you can afford the payments. You can totally afford, and for many people also credit card debt. I think it's less of a problem for our community because we've kind of nailed it so many times. But how much of that is consumer credit card debt? And so for you and I, it's very simple, and hopefully for many people in our audience, it's very simple. We have a mortgage. We have no other consumer debt. Student loans are gone. And so then we say, we just kind of we are that line of delineation is very clear. Really, there's only two layers to this. It's my structural expenses, my home, my food, groceries, my utilities, various forms of insurance, mortgage, and then after that, it's just kind of just slush or savings, right? I mean, it's just these things probably, if they needed to, they could kind of be chopped off, and you could just have your survival budget, which is a big difference between maybe what your life actually costs on a month to month basis. That has to be part of the war game calculation.
Yeah, I think that is probably the single most important point of if you're talking about having these different budgets of, oh, wow, things are going wrong, right? What does my life actually cost then versus, hey, this is just steady state, right? Which I know you love that phrase. It's, hey, steady state, this is my normal life. This is what life costs versus, okay, this is what I could really pare it back to if there were an emergency. And then you need to think through the second level effects of that, right? If you happen to lose your jobs and you were making no income, then as currently constituted here in the US, and obviously this could always change, but you would get significant subsidies on your health insurance, right? So those are the rules of the game, as you said before. It's life is like a board game, whether we like it or not. You need to know the rules of the game. And again, it's irrelevant whether you or I like this or not, but if you have minimal to no income, you're going to get significant subsidies. So whereas I might in my steady state budget have a significant line item in my current life for health insurance, and it is significant. Obviously, we've talked about that repeatedly, how expensive health insurance is in this country.
Thank goodness I have health insurance. Oh my
Yeah,
goodness.
yeah. But right, if you're talking about having this kind of wargaming type budget, you know that line item would go down to virtually zero in the worst case scenario.
And that's a great point, Brad, is actually the income piece of this. This is something that was, I think, reality check. I think this, honestly, this has been the biggest wake up call for all of us in terms of assessing our risk tolerance. No one in January 2020 thought that every single retail small business owner in the country would have, no matter industry, dentist, I don't care if you're a dentist or you're a restaurant owner, was going to have to figure something out. Like industry, everybody across the entire country got shut down. The small business owners, their livelihoods for a period of time got paused, put on hold, or disappeared. I'm a small business owner. Brad's a small business owner. We have a very low risk business with a small footprint. It works out of our homes. We don't have a rent. We don't have mortgage. We don't have a ton of things that we need to cover. Our business was affected dramatically. Alan Donegan's business was affected. And the entire world's small business was affected. And I think regardless of whether you're a small business owner or an employee, you felt the effects of this. And we could say, well, what about the government? Well, the government had their own thing, if you remember earlier this year, last fall, with their own 2-month no pay period of time that they had to deal with, right? Income and how stable is your income? How much can you guarantee on that paycheck? I think every single one of us got a punch to the face to remind us that, like, if you're depending on an employer for your income, you just can't. I mean, it's not to say that, you're not going to get paid the week after this, the week after that, but if you're just blindly assuming that without any nothing could happen to take your paycheck away at any point in time ever, it's always going to come. You're kidding yourself. You're kidding yourself. That's cynical, but that's where I sit now that I didn't sit in January.
Well, I'll push back on that. I don't think that's being quite as cynical as you might think. I think you're actually making the larger case for FI.
Yes.
I know, sure, in that case, you might be talking about one specifically cynical item, but I really think the larger point holds, which is you shouldn't be depending on anyone, right? No matter how secure or stable you think you are, your own business is, or your employment, right? And I mean, we saw this firsthand. As you mentioned, we're small business owners in our own little way here, but our business got rocked in March, April, May. I mean, rocked. And we could not have predicted, even with wargaming. And again, that's something that we actually did, which I think is another hallmark of FI thinking is you plan for eventualities, right? We couldn't have planned for the eventuality that befell us and really more importantly, small businesses, like you said, with actual bricks and mortar locations all across the country. Nobody could have planned for, hey, business went to 0 or business went to 2%, right? Even if you were ahead of the game and you had a couple months of savings. I mean, how many small businesses actually have 3, 6, 9 months of expenses saved up? Very few. But those that did, even them, they couldn't have possibly predicted that it was going to go down to zero. And now, obviously, then the response is, how do you pivot? Right? Again, it's that mindset of positivity, of how can I take this situation, which is objectively terrible, and how can I pivot and try to get through this based on the planning that I did? So that's savings. Sure, that will run out after 6 months if I'm down at zero. But what if I was down at 30%? What if I could eke it up to 35% and then cut expenses a little bit? Like if you had these plans set, then you can maybe find a bridge out of it. And I think that again is the case that you're making for FI, right? Is you're not depending on anybody. You have plans, albeit you certainly hope that this doesn't come to reality, but you need to plan and you never know. And again, this is even in normal times, right? So I've told the story of my initial kind of FI inkling back when I was 22 years old and I worked at the accounting firm Arthur Andersen, which in 2001 there was this crazy Enron scandal, which is, now in the annals of history, but this was real life for me. And this accounting firm, which was the biggest and best accounting firm in the world, did not exist 9 months after I started working there. And that was impossible to predict. But what I saw was people living just to the edge of their salaries. And these were good salaries. I saw partners, senior managers with all the accoutrements of an upper middle class or upper class lifestyle. And this was a calamity, right? Whereas contrast that with me, sure, this is not ideal for my career to have this at the beginning of it, but I was living at home. I didn't have a car payment. I had maybe, I forget, I think I had $5,000 or $10,000 of student loan debt when I graduated college. And that was it. I had a couple $100s a month at most. So I was going to be fine. Right. And again, having just that mindset of, okay, anything can happen. You never know when that safe employer is not going to be there. So, Jonathan, I know I'm going on and on here, but I think this is important that people really take this to heart, that this is why we plan.
Mm. I think part of what I'm doing is I'm analyzing my own risk tolerance, and I've been, very public in saying that for a period of time, I'm just, I have an extremely high risk tolerance because time is on my side, and I talked about my ability to be flexible and to pivot in a different, and I still feel a strong version of that. But at the same point, I also recognize that like I don't have as much control over every aspect of this world as I would like. Control freak over here. I can't control every outcome that I want. And that's made me just kind of have a moment of introspection and look at these variables and say, all right, what can I control? I can control my expenses. I don't mind spending money, a lot of money in some cases, on a one off item, but I don't want to lock myself into structural recurring payments that make my life more expensive because if the variables change down the road, I need to be able to have more control and facts on the ground. My income. I'm very bullish on my ability to go generate new income in various ways, to start new businesses, to go work for an employer, to retrain into high ROI fields. I've done the research, and so even if something were to happen and my own business, our own business were to fall apart, I feel pretty confident that in any universe, based on the skill stack I've started to put together, I can, if I have about a year runway, I can land. I have a very soft landing, very soft landing. So that is the other aspect of my risk tolerance. But I don't want the pain that comes with having being scared for a year, being scared for a year. And so in the past, I would have probably just been 100% equities and ride that all the way. Think long-term timeline, time in the market versus time in the market. But I've kind of over the last year learning from people like Frank, Brad, maybe we can reference that episode. Paul Merriman, JL Collins, have kind of put these together and realized that um, I'm a little bit I'm not as aggressive as I was even 24 months ago. I don't need to be at the very end of the extreme. So I've started now kind of reevaluating, am I 100% equities? Do I have a piece of my savings that's going towards something a little bit more conservative? or something that, as Frank talked about, hugely valuable episode, something that's negatively correlated with the market. So if we see a dip in the market, if the market dips, do people run towards something like treasuries or like gold? This is something that he was talking about. And yes, you know, most of the time you will outperform if you're in just total equities, but you take on extra risk. You take on extra risk when you do that. And it's not, over the long term, sure, you'd be like, well, you outperform, but like sometimes it's the shorter terms that you're more concerned about. It's the next year, it's the next 5 years, it's the next, that sort of thing. And so I've been kind of talking with my wife and saying, what if? What if the market, we did have another version of what we just went through in the next couple months? And we saw another 20% or 30% or 50% drop. What if some businesses did just disappear? What would happen? And what would we do? And those are just real conversations that we're having. And it's looking like us having real conversations about our investor policy statement and figuring out what do we want to do when we go forward. Um, what I loved about what Frank said, and I'll give it back to you in just a second here, and I know you're going to reference the episode. Frank said the time to change your investor policy statement or change your investing strategy is not when it's all falling apart. It's too late. You don't do it when the markets think, but here we are now approaching the record highs that we had back in February. Things are feeling a little bit more steady state. And now it's saying, how did that feel? How did that feel? Because if you wanted to make some small tweaks to what you were doing before, do it when things are okay. Don't do it when it's all falling apart, because now you're selling low and buying high. That's not a good strategy for winning long term. So I'm actually going back and I'm listening to episodes like that with Frank, and we can have a couple more examples just to say, if I wanted to ease into a more conservative approach, a slightly more conservative approach to long-term investing, what choices could I make to set ourselves up for success and something that would be confident with this new information that we have? Largely, that the income piece of this is more variable than I would like.
Right. Yeah, and since you referenced it a couple times, it was episode 194 with Frank. So it's the role of bonds in a portfolio. That's a wonderful episode. We originally had the white coat investor, Jim Daly, on episode 97. So that's where I think, Jonathan, that's where we originally talked about these investor policy statements. And I just want to say, like, as your friend and co-host on this podcast, like, I think it's really intellectually honest of you to talk about this, right? You've been very open and adamant about you being 100% in equities for the last 4 years. And I hope you, and certainly nobody in the audience, thinks that it's a defeat or something negative that you're rethinking that. I think what you're doing is you're understanding yourself better. And isn't that what we all want just from life in general, right? Is to understand ourselves better. And if you came through, like you said, the highs in February of 2020, this crazy roller coaster, and obviously nobody knows where the future is going to bring, but as we're recording this on December 1st of 2020, we're pretty much back at those highs. So no harm, no foul. I say this in the cosmic scheme of just the market to market, top to top. If you decide now to change your strategy, that's a perfectly rational time to do it. And you've went through this 10-month period of crazy uncertainty. You've seen your range of emotions. You didn't sell in a panic, right? And okay, now, like you said, you're at that point of steady state, and you can decide, hey, I want to dial this back to 90% equities, 80%, 50, whatever the number is, Jonathan. I don't fault you at all for whatever you ultimately pick, right? I think, again, it's know thyself. And I think that is the critical thing that we really want to get across to all of you listening to this is you have to be honest with yourself and you have to know yourself. And also keep in mind that you understand, I guess, theoretically, as we've had many, many experts on, like Big Earn, et cetera, that over the long term, Jonathan, if you picked 100% equities versus 10% equities, I think you know intellectually that 50 years from now, barring a zombie apocalypse, that 100% equities is going to be the better choice for a higher net worth than 10% equities. And I'm setting up this kind of ridiculous example, obviously. But if you cannot sleep at night with 100%, if your risk tolerance just simply isn't there, then I would not fault you one iota for the 10%
Mm.
option. Now, I'd like to believe there's probably something in the middle, right? Again, I set up a kind of a straw man argument here, uh, but I think that's the critical part to get across. And I think it's really impressive that you are looking at your life and saying, all right, listen, maybe I don't have the tolerance that I thought I had.
Yeah, I mean, these are the big things that I'm grappling with right now. The final thing that I'm kind of when I'm looking at my actual equity, and honestly, what I'm trying to do with a couple things, Brad, is I'm dropping a couple episodes because people do your own research, right? Don't just stop here. We're not telling you exactly what to do. These are the questions, the research that I'm doing personally now with 1 year of hindsight, what we just went through. I'm doing this myself, and I'm just pointing to the same resources, which, by the way, many times are episodes that we've had on the show because Brad and I are pursuing getting better at this personally. We're not two experts telling you exactly what to do. We're two guys that are trying to figure it out and going and reaching out to really knowledgeable people that have done amazing things and have a body of work that's worth talking about and then highlighting that for you. We're just letting you listen to our own personal conversations as we're trying to get better. And so to kind of weave this a little bit, when we started with JL Collins talking about the simple path to wealth, phenomenal episode. We're actually planning on talking to JL again at the beginning of this year. It just says you got to get started. People will help you right out of all of your money. You can do this yourself. Keep it simple. The Simple Path to Wealth in the stock series really was a foundational building block. And then as we layered some complexity into this, we were speaking, I believe, with like Todd Tressiter around episode 50 or so. And he was saying there's more layers to this game. There's more layers. Like just, you don't necessarily have to stop there. And then we got into our early hundreds episode 130 with Paul Merriman. I'm going to pause and slow down on this one a little bit. Paul Merriman, super well known in the community, has studied academia, studied all the research, and basically made the case that there's something to be said for looking at a portfolio that weights all of the asset classes evenly. Now, I'm going to slow down here because this is a big idea, and I think it's easy for me to miss it. It sounds like Greek, but it's totally understandable. When we own a total stock market index fund, they all have them. Fidelity has one, Schwab has one, Vanguard has one. When we own a total stock market fund, they are cap weighted. And I guess, Brad, I'll hand this back to you. Explain what cap weighted means in the context of a total stock market index fund.
Yeah, so it's market capitalization. That's the phrase. And we obviously don't ever like to get bogged down in lingo here, but this is important to know. So it's essentially the total number of shares multiplied by the share price gets you the total market capitalization of that company. So I think was Amazon the first $1 trillion company earlier this year, Jonathan? So Amazon as a whole, if you took all of their shares and just added up the value, their market cap, their entire value would be about $1 trillion, or it certainly was at one point. So basically, it's looking at that total value. So even if we say the S&P 500, right, the top 10 or 20 firms are a significant portion of that total market cap if you added up the S&P 500. So if you took the total market cap of all 500 of those companies, the top 10 or 20 firms, which would only make up, let's say 2 or 4% of the total number of that 500, they make up a hugely disproportionate percent of the total market cap.
So thank you. Yeah. So if you have the S&P 500 as 500 companies, the largest companies inside the United States, of which now Tesla is about to be added, by the way, that's going to be very interesting to see that map out. And then you were to then expand outside of that and say, well, I'd like a little bit more diversity. Let me look at a total stock market index fund. There's over 3,000 publicly traded companies in the United States that make up that total stock market index fund. You're like, more diversity. When you have a cap weighted, then like you just said, Brad, a disproportionate amount of your money is invested in these biggest companies. And we know who they are. It's Facebook, it's Amazon, it's Microsoft, it's Google, it's Netflix, FANG, plus M. There's some other acronyms, but like 5 to 10 companies probably make up over 20% of what you have invested. That's probably accurate. I might be undersounding. It might actually be more than that, especially this past year. And Paul Merriman says, you're not as diversified as you think you are. What if instead of having all of our money in just lockstep in a cap weighted, fund, what if we actually we evenly distribute our money between small cap, so small companies, small businesses, medium-sized businesses and large businesses, and it more evenly distributes our money around those asset classes. Now, here's the problem with that in the short term is that strategy has gotten crushed for about 10 years. Totally crushed. The larger companies, like the ones I just mentioned, Facebook's, the Amazon, the Microsoft, they have carried most of the stock market returns for probably the last decade. And even during this recovery, those companies have barely went down. They went down marginally and then they came right back. And so there's been even more consolidation over the last year. So, but again, I'm not even weighing in other than just to say I'm noticing that, and I'm saying I'm not as diversified as I think I am. Now here's the problem. This is a huge problem for us as investors. We all like to chase returns. We all like to chase whatever has done well. We'll keep doing well, which could be right because none of us have future balls. But the counterpoint to that is every year you actually have less diversity than you think. And what will it look like over 40 or 50 years? Is there some sort of equalization that happens at some particular point in time? We just don't know. And I'm not telling you what to do there. I'm just saying that's what I'm sitting with right now. And you guys remember I talked about this a year ago. I was doing a horse race. I had half of this amount of money in a total stock market fund and the other half in something like Paul Merriman was talking about, which is very easy to set up on something like M1. It would be very complicated back in the day, but on the platform like M1, something like that is just a couple button clicks and you can replicate what it is that he's talking about. All your money being distributed evenly among all the different asset classes. That strategy has gotten crushed though. I mean, it just simply, it hasn't kept up. But Paul doesn't look at it in terms of 5 or 10 year, 20 or 40 year timelines. You got to look at it over a 40-year window. And when you do that, you see that usually small cap and value, which are companies that are underappreciated, usually tend to bring the highest returns. Hasn't been true for a decade. Will it be true again? We don't have future balls. I don't know. But I think the biggest point is kind of understand a little bit about what these index funds represent and what you're actually invested in. You don't need to have a master's degree in it, but you should kind of understand a little bit about what you're in. And, just when you're doing your war gaming, you're like, what does it look like for this to win? And so that's just kind of what I'm dealing with. I don't know which one's going to map out. It could be, and it certainly seems like it has been for the last, everything is moving online. Everything is moving to consolidation. Large cap seems like it will just grow forever. Historically, for the last 100 years, that hasn't been the case. But things move really fast, and I'm just weighing through that. And I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know exactly what's going to happen, but this is just what I'm considering. I just want to make sure I understand the level of diversity that I'm actually investing in, and that I'm comfortable with that. That's just kind of like for instance, if you have all these companies that truly are the biggest companies in the country, and then suddenly it turns out that there's a monopoly in place and something gets broken up, how does that what does that do to you if you're disproportionately invested in them and now and I just don't know how it maps out. And so that's kind of one of these things where I'm a little bit more interested in diversity. I'm a little bit more interested in spreading my stuff out, and I'm also taking a look at my risk tolerance and I'm saying, do I want to be 100% equities, or does it look like a slightly more conservative for a smaller piece, 10, 20%? And then on top of that, making sure that I'm evenly distributed among as many companies as possible, using something like an ultimate buy and hold, or a blend of ultimate buy and hold and what JL Collins talks about, the total stock market approach. Brad, these are big ideas, and it's not something you want to do while you're on tilt. You want to kind of have a logical thought process. So I am just talking with my wife and just mapping out if this, then that. How do we feel about it?
Yeah. And I think something you said in there, you said the level of diversity, right? The level of diversity that you're comfortable with. And to be clear, just to you and to most importantly is the audience, you're not talking about a repudiation of index funds or low cost index funds or anything we've talked about here on the podcast. You're just saying, okay, wow, maybe I learned something new that doesn't work perfectly for me, right? So in just the last couple of minutes while you're talking, I looked up the Vanguard Sp 500 ETF, which is ticker symbol VOO. And yeah, to the point, it's the top 10 largest holdings. So that's 2% of the S&P 500 make up 28.9% of total net assets. And like you said, you named most of those companies plus Berkshire Hathaway, Johnson & Johnson, Procter & Gamble, Visa, et cetera. That makes up about 30% of that S&P 500 fund. So if that's something you're not personally comfortable with, then I can understand looking at somebody like Paul Merriman, who obviously has thought about this, has researched it, and you want to maybe move more towards his strategy. I think that's perfectly reasonable. And again, that's not a repudiation of anything. And I think that makes a lot of sense. And you're not saying to anyone, not least of which yourself, that I'm chasing returns, right? I mean, I think your anticipation would be that that would get you somewhere in the vicinity of a similar return over a long period of time. But you're not arguing to anybody that you're chasing returns. You're chasing something that you can be comfortable with and armed with new information. So I think yet again, I'm trying to play armchair
Yeah.
psychiatrist to you here. Like, I don't think this is unreasonable at all. I really don't.
Thank you. Yeah, and that's a great point. Like those 10 companies, like if anybody invested in those 10 companies over the last 10 years, they would be beyond happy with how those 10 companies performed. Absolutely. I mean, those companies have all been rocket ships, absolute rocket ships. Um, and also the counter approach to this is like you can't afford to just sit in cash and wait and just wait it out. We talked about compounding interest on the other in an episode in the very, very recently. Just sitting cash in the bank account or in the coffee can is not a viable strategy for this either. We have to be with intention, kind of look at the framework for what we're experiencing. And I truly believe in index fund investing because Brad, I don't do my research. Like I do not go look at company prospectus documents and look at the forecast and try to get inside information that's somehow magically available on Twitter and or on forums. And like that's not a viable way to win long term. Um, and probably the worst thing that could happen is that it works once, right? Because then you just and then but I mean this is the thing. And I think the heart of index fund investing is let's not just try to find the one magical, rocket ship. Let's buy them all. But if buy them all means that, 30% of what we have is right now in less than 10 companies, that ethos is getting a little bit separated, I'm concerning. So I'm wondering like what does it look like to even that out a little bit? And and how do you do that? Because I still don't want to research companies. I really don't. Brian Feraldi talked about this, a fantastic episode. There is probably a practical way to do this long term for some individuals, but I don't want to. I'd rather put my energy into building a new business or a new skill set or something else. I don't want to spend time reading forums to figure out how this company is going to do over the next couple. Index funds is clearly the way. And it used to be that this would be very hard to kind of create your own index or to create kind of a custom index or to buy them all with it used to be very hard. It's increasingly a couple button clicks on a platform like M1. And you can have a version that matches up to, what companies you can get excited about, what asset classes you get excited about. Like you can have a very, very complex portfolio that's in actuality very, very simple because you put a little thought into how you put it together and then you just fund it on a regular basis over time, which is the heart of what we're talking about. Keep it simple, reduce the fees, lower the fees, and invest for the long term. I don't know. Have I just poked the bear, one too many times with this? This is personally what I'm looking at. And I think two great individuals to just go do your research on is JL Collins, the simple path to wealth approach, and then Paul Merriman with the ultimate buy and hold portfolio. And just notice that JL Collins, the simple path to wealth, he tweaks his strategy from time to time. Not huge tweaks because he's directionally, this is the best path. But at the margins, should you be in REITs? Should you not be in REITs? What is your, it's inside of a general framework. The general framework is 100% correct. We don't know. We can't control it. Buy them all. But inside of that is what does buy them all mean and what's the best way to do that? And that is where I think I'm spending a little bit of my time.
Yeah, I like it. And obviously we're talking more broadly here about this wargaming, right? And just over the last half hour, we've talked about the expense side, the income side, and investing. And I think those are really the three pillars that each of us need to really think through. And we probably spent the least amount of time on expenses, but I think you can look again at, all right, what does my life cost in steady state versus, all right, these are the things that if something were to befall me, what could I cut? What would still make for for a solid life, obviously, but you're talking about those little extras that are in your budget. I know in my own budget, we probably have five or $10,000 a year that we could cut tomorrow if we had to, right? I could easily tick them off, but those are parts of our lives right now, right? So again, because we've set up this framework of the math that works for us, there's no need to cut them because they are part of our steady state life. But again, if I were wargaming, okay, I know those things could go down. I know, like I said before, my health insurance could go down. I know that if worst case scenario, I could sell my house and we could move to a less expensive house. I think through all these things. And I hope clearly that those things never come to pass, but I'd be silly to not at least consider the option, right?
I mean, this is it. This is exactly it. You actually mentioned the expenses there, and I realized this is another thing that we probably should have referenced, but expenses in a different way. Like, how expensive are your investments? This is something the FI community has done such a great service to the world for, is highlighting the insidious nature of fees and expenses. It used to be so expensive to invest, and you always thought you need a person, a helper, to help you invest. And they would just get their fixed commission right off the top, and then they'd invest you in some sort of things that had another fixed commission or fee right off the top called an expense ratio. You would just be helped sideways. They would get theirs, and your money would just go sideways. And you would get all of this under the promise of, well, we're going to help you figure out when to get in and get out, and we've got the secrets off. They don't know anything. They've got credit card debt up to their eyeballs. Your expenses are funding their life. They don't know anything. And I think that is the biggest thing. And as the FI communities continue to highlight this, now investment firms are competing for your business. The fees have gone to near zero. You don't need to spend 1% of your returns on the person anymore, and 1% of your returns on the investment vehicle that you're in or the fund that you're in anymore. That's all gone. Now, people are still doing that. It's still out there. If you're not careful, what if someone gave you all the messaging that I'm giving you right now on this show, and they tell you about all these variables and how you can't trust anything and how the world is uncertain, and they're going to help you do all this, but it's going to be a 2% fee or a 3% fee or a 4% fee. There are people that are trading on your fear, and in the meantime, they're getting their commission right off the top the entire way. This is what you got to watch out for. It's important to have an intellectually honest conversation about we can't control the future. We don't know what's coming. But be very careful when those helpers side up right beside you and say, well, we can take care of all that stress and anxiety for you, and it's just going to cost you 2%. 2.5%, 3%, whatever. That is, Brad, I mean, I know we've done so many episodes on the cost of fees, but this is exactly what happens. People trade on your fear, and they get their guaranteed return, and you're just left on tilt. Kind of like I was when I was playing that game with Laura.
She is frightening at that game. To come full circle on that. I could see her penning you in so you couldn't build any further.
It was dire, man. I was like, this can't be a coincidence.
Been there, done that.
I know she's laughing right now, Laura. Yes, I saw it all happening. I won't sit to your left anymore. All right, my friends, I hope this was useful. This is a very positive conversation to have. You having this conversation now with your significant other, just going through the exercise period by yourself if you're the sole person responsible for it. You're wargaming your finances out, thinking about all the variables that are unique to you, analyzing your risk tolerance, your income, your expenses, and then saying, what pieces of this do I actually have control over? And it'll surprise you how much control you do actually have. There are things that you can do. That you can do things in the short term, the medium term, and the long term. Longer you've been on this path, the easier it is. But it's important for us not to wait till we're on tilt, not to wait until, things aren't working, to start looking at this. There's just a point of encouragement as we kind of start moving into the last month of this very trying, squirrely year, that we'd say, do we like how our plan came together? Do we like the decisions that we made up this point? Do we want to make any small tweaks? How do we want to go forward together? And I hope that you got some benefit from, maybe me just sharing with you what I'm personally still working through and recognizing it is okay. We do not have to be dogmatic about anything. You can question all of your assumptions, especially if you're presented with new information or your perception of the world changes. Okay, with that in mind, we're going to go and pivot, Brad. I know we have some community stuff actually teed up here. Let's talk about some wins for a second.
Yeah, Jonathan. So wins. Actually, we have a cool little announcement here. So our year-end wins episode that we do every year here on the podcast, we decided to make a live event this year. So this is going to happen the evening of December the 8th. So just in a handful of days from when this goes live. So the 8th at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So we're going to publicize this in the Facebook group. So you'll see links to it. But if you are looking for a direct link, we'll have it set up through choosefi.com/2020wins. And actually, we are still looking for a couple more people to join me and you on that live event. So if you have 2020 wins that you want to talk to the community about, you want to have a chance to chat with me and Jonathan, send me an email to feedback@choosefi.com and just send me a quick synopsis of your year-end wins. And then I'll set up links so we can get you live actually on that event. But we really think this is going to be a lot of fun. I know, Jonathan, this is your brainchild, and I think it's going to be a blast. I really do.
It will be a good time. And we've never been able to do it live before. It's always been voicemails, etc. But it is just fun sharing the floor. I mean, you inspire us. This community inspires us, and we're so excited to see where it goes into the future. So ChooseFI.com, you said, Brad, 2020 wins, correct?
Yep. And again, that's on the evening of the 8th. So it's this coming Tuesday.
I feel like I left a slash out there. ChooseFI.com/2020.
I think they would have figured it out.
Maybe.
But yeah, that's great.
Maybe. My mom, not so much. Okay. All right. So yeah, go ahead, Brad. What you have a couple wins to share with the community today?
Yeah, so we have our book drawing, and how this works is if you're a member of the FI Weekly newsletter, which you can get that newsletter. So this is the newsletter I send out each and every week with just kind of a couple of quick bullet points of inspiration, things I'm pondering, maybe special deals I found or something like that. And what I ask every single week is for you to hit reply and send me your win of the week. And I read every single one of these things. And each week we read a couple of them as our book winners. So Jonathan, we've long done a book drawing, and this is the newest incarnation of it, which is that FI Weekly, because we love getting these wins. And the winner here gets one of our books from ChooseFI Publishing. So we have 4 different books now. And yeah, the first winner that I picked out here is Abby. And she said, next week I turn 22. This year I found ChooseFI in February through Clark Howard, and I was almost done with paying off $17,000 in student loans. ChooseFI changed my life. I finished paying off the loan. I maxed my Roth IRA for both 19 and 20, which is actually a cool thing, as Sean Mullaney told us, right? You can max out your IRAs all the way through April 15th, just as a little aside for the prior year, which is kind of cool. Abby maxed out her 403B, 457, and HSA.
Wow,
That's
the trifecta.
That's incredible. Plus a little into a 401A, which frankly I've never heard of. She paid cash for a used 2014 Toyota Venza. And this podcasting group inspired me to get a second job for an extra $30,000.
Oh my goodness.
Work all overtime. And I managed to break the $100,000 mark in my first year of nursing.
Yes.
All amazing. All this while being, quote, just a staff nurse. I can't really share this with my family and friends, so thank you for letting me share it with you all. Wow. Jonathan, 22 years old. That's amazing.
Absolutely crushing. Wow. Okay, she's 22 years old. So basically, she's already hit Coast Fi. Do you realize that? I mean, these are the numbers I run in my head. If you've broken a 6-figure net worth at 22, you could never save another dollar again, and you would have already passed the number that most people, want or need at a traditional retirement age, assuming you're getting average market returns for, 40 years or so. That's just absurd. That's time is on your side when you have this wake up call earlier, when you're sharing these ideas with your kids, getting them started, sharing it with your friends and family. Get started. And yes, we all wish we had started 10 years ago. I wish I had started 10 years ago. But start today, get started. If you're not taking action, there's really no point in you checking in with us once or twice a week. I mean, I know we're funny, Brad. I mean, we're a great sense of humor, but this is just the information is the rules of the game. And people are winning at life. They're winning this board game not because they're entertained, but because they're taking action. So sure, be entertained, but get started. All right, my friends, the fire is spreading. We'll see you next time as we continue to go down the road less traveled.